You have 30 seconds to decide if you'll ever see your family again. Level 1. The escape. You rehearse the story in whispers. You measure windows, the ones that look onto the street, the ones with cameras, the one that opens quietly. You time the meals. You note the leaders' routines. You count the guards, the volunteers who always stand too close. No one in the group notices you learning the cadence of leaving. They mistake focus for devotion. You take one last conversation like a curtain call. You laugh when they laugh. You ask about the prophecy they hand out like scripture. You pretend belief until your mouth stops trembling. At night, you pack in the dark. A toothbrush, a few dollars. Your old ID folded into a corner no one checks. You pick a name you won't use again. You tell yourself the worst case scenarios until they are less scary than staying. You decide the exact second you will walk out. The door is a small surrender and a giant theft. You breathe. You step through. The first steps feel like stealing air. You don't look back. You run. You split your phone's battery. You cut lines of contact the way you cut rope. Decisive and quiet. A friend waits at the edge of town, eyes shaded by a hood. You slide into a car that smells like coffee and used upholstery. You go to a safe house. It's a one-room apartment with a mattress and compassion. You turn off your phone. You breathe again, but it's a different kind of breath. The first hours are a scramble. You call a hot line through voicemail. You answer questions you never thought you'd hear your own voice speak. You sleep for 2 hours and wake with a new kind of fear, the one that's free to imagine. Level 2. The psychological aftermath. The world is too loud. Everyone's faces feel like mirrors you're not allowed to look into. You used to know where you fit. The group gave you a name, a role, a small shelf on which to stand. Now the shelf is gone. Your identity feels like a shirt with the tag cut out. You grieve. Not just the people left behind, but the person you were when you thought their rules were your compass. You miss rituals. You miss the rhythms that told you when to eat and pray and forgive. You miss the certainty that someone else would tell you what mattered. Grief hits in odd shapes. It comes when you smell incense on a passerby. It comes when a song on the radio mentions devotion. It comes as a nausea that looks a lot like homesickness. Everyone tells you it's simple, good versus bad. Escape equals freedom. But freedom is a blank page that terrifies you. You feel hollowed out where beliefs used to be. Deprogramming starts like a grain of sand under an eyelid. You blink and it becomes grit. Facts begin to replace catechism. You learn boundaries and they feel rude and unnatural, like wearing a jacket for the first time in months. You carry guilt like a physical weight. You left people who you love and who love you back in the only language they have. You wonder if betrayal is ever justified. You wonder if you are the villain of someone else's story. Therapy feels like a map. You learn to say simple truths. You own the words you were taught to avoid. You practice being boring in public. Grocery lines, bus rides, small talk about the weather. It is both healing and humiliating. Slowly the fog lifts. Not enough to be whole, but enough to put one foot in front of the other. Level 3, the danger. Leaving wasn't a period, it was an ellipsis. They start with calls that sound like accidents. Friends you thought had died send messages that are thinly veiled accusations. A package arrives with photos from inside the safe house, taken from a distance. You freeze on the couch like someone who's been hit with cold water. You assume someone is watching. You buy cheap curtains at midnight and sleep with the lights on. You change cars 3 times in a month. You learn to notice the same face twice at different coffee shops. A person you trusted in the group sends a voicemail, a normal voice, small talk, then a line you remember from leader speeches. It is a reminder. You report threats. The police are polite but slow. You get a file number and a suggestion to get a restraining order. Bureaucratic armor in a world that runs on belief. Harassment moves like water. It finds the smallest opening. Late-night texts from blocked numbers. Anonymous reviews on your workplace. Rumors whispered to your mother at her job. They try to reclaim you by making the world unsafe. You worry about your family. You worry the group will bring harm to the ones you left. You start sleeping with a phone under the pillow and a list of emergency numbers taped to the back of a door. Sometimes the threats are direct. Someone follows you home. A car idles outside the grocery store. Once, a man in a van leans out and says your childhood nickname. He knows things an outsider shouldn't. The thrill of escape becomes a mode of constant cauterization. You live in the margins, always checking reflections and back seats, but you also learn to hide in plain sight. You pick a job that requires early shifts. You learn where cameras' blind spots are. You make alliances with neighbors who don't ask questions. You teach yourself to be uninteresting, a shield and sometimes salvation. Level 4, reintegration. Time is not linear here. It is patient and small. You start with tiny routines, a coffee at the same shop, a plant that doesn't die, a credit card in your name. You practice telling a simple truth about your past to a stranger and watching for the reaction, surprise, pity, boredom. You rebuild relationships like a mason lays bricks. Some family members answer your calls. Some doors remain closed forever. You learn forgiveness as a practical tool, not a cosmic one. You forgive to sleep, not to absolve. Trust returns in increments. You test it by leaving someone alone with a spare key and seeing them return it. You begin to date again, clumsy and awake. You find therapists who speak plain language and do not proselytize. You learn new communities, volunteers, co-workers, book clubs, where loyalty is earned, not bought. You teach others what you wish you'd known. You speak at a shelter. You answer a hotline. You write a note and fold it into an envelope for someone who might leave tonight. Meaning is not handed back to you. You claim it. Years later, the burn marks are still there. You still jump sometimes when a car brakes too close. But fear no longer scripts your days. You have learned a different courage. The leader's words are now background noise. You own a small apartment that is yours in more ways than law can prove. You talk openly about the loneliness of leaving. You teach your children how to ask questions and how to say no. You look at your reflection without flinching. You keep a list of the people you couldn't save, and you honor them by living a life they would not have expected. There is no triumphant finish line. There is steady work. There are days you laugh until you cry. There are nights you replay your exit like a film, and then you close the theater. Freedom is not a destination, it is a practice. You practice it every day.